Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Takedown. The Takedown is a French action comedy serving as a sequel to the 2012 film On the Other Side of the Tracks, and tells the story of a pair of cops, Ousmane Diakité and Francois Mauger, who are complete opposites in terms of personality, yet their partnership has always been able to overcome the criminals they pursue. In this movie, the pair takes on an unexpectedly big criminal case, starting off as a routine murder investigation and spiraling into a political conspiracy the likes of which France has never seen, so the two must work together once again to save innocent lives at risk. I didn't realize this movie was a sequel until reading an IMDb comment about it, so my review may be lacking some context here and there. Nevertheless, I thought this was a fairly entertaining movie. It won't win awards or anything like that, but it still succeeds as a fun action flick. Omar Sy effortlessly steals the show as Ousmane, which is no surprise considering how great he was in Netflix's Lupin. He has just as much charisma here as he did in that show, holding his own with both the action scenes and the dialogue he shares with other characters. He's much more awkward compared to his partner. I'm not sure if it's because of something I missed from the previous movie or not, but it's funny to see him squirm at the sight of a naked woman or get in over his head with physical confrontations, and these gags remain funny without being overused. By comparison, his partner Francois is a bit more bland, but he still has some memorable characteristics about him. He's no stranger to sexual encounters and is a bit snarkier when dealing with others, and this often results in other people treating him with disdain. I started feeling bad for him as the movie progressed because he gets disregarded by pretty much anyone who isn't Ousmane. Despite this though, he remains determined to help out with the investigation even though it's not part of his job description, so this does make him somewhat likable. The relationship dynamic between the two leads is definitely the best thing about it. They almost have a rivalry of sorts with the way these two bicker and crack jokes at each other's expense, and how one tries to outshine the other with certain tasks. They can't even walk through a door without complaining to each other. I like that each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, like with how Francois has to save Ousmane from his recklessness, or how Ousmane has to take over a conversation that Francois bungles. They play off each other well, and it makes me wonder what their relationship was like in the first movie. As for the investigation they're involved in, it's unfortunately pretty bog standard. The whole conspiracy behind everything feels like it's happened in at least a dozen other action movies before it, with how there's a secret evil organization and it's up to two people operating outside of their jurisdiction to stop it. I have to admit that I didn't even understand what was going on in the story half the time. Characters breeze through clues and come to conclusions in quick and convenient fashion, so there's little to no time available to process what's happening in the story before the pair move on to the next scene. These clue reviews are usually mixed in with lengthy dialogue scenes that can go on for a pretty long time. They exist more for the comedy as opposed to anything notable story-wise and are funny to a certain extent, but because these scenes go on for so long, the joke usually outstays its welcome. This leads me to talk about the comedy in general, which I find to be a bit of a mixed bag. As I mentioned earlier, the movie is at its best when it's focused on the personality and behavior differences between Ousmane and Francois. The banter they exchanged with each other was always amusing. Conversely, the movie tended to go over the top with slapstick, like the pair bumbling about trying to catch a suspect, and straight up toilet level humor, such as when a chicken farts in Francois' face. One example that sticks out to me involves Francois checking out a dead man's body part, we'll say, and he examines it in graphic detail, which became more gross the longer it went on. On that note, there's also an unusually high amount of nudity featured in the movie that varies between being gross and creepy, depending on the context of the scene. Even when it's implied and not shown, like when Francois takes off his underwear before going to bed, it's still weird and doesn't really add to the humor. And it might be just my opinion on this, but I personally found the amount of casual racism sprinkled throughout the movie to be a bit odd. It's one thing when it's just Ousmane and Francois joking about each other's race, but when so many other characters throughout the movie highlight the fact that Ousmane is black, it feels more weird than funny. The action scenes do help balance things out a bit more. Being that this is directed by Louis Leterrier, I had a good feeling about what to expect in this regard, and thankfully my expectations were met. It features a mix of brawls and gunfights that get the adrenaline pumping, as well as some impressive stunt work, especially in the final set piece. The chase scenes were some of the most entertaining scenes in the whole movie, though coming from one of the directors of Lupin, this is hardly surprising. The camera work in these sequences is fast and frenetic, always matching the pace of the chase, and aside from some explosions, the stunts are largely performed with real cars and with no CGI involved, which I really appreciate. Sadly, many of these chases and a few of the other action scenes are marred by spastic close-ups that make it hard to figure out what's happening on screen. Not being able to see the action is one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to action movies, and it's disappointing to see this trend continue in this movie. A lot of these action scenes, as well as the more investigative moments, take place in a variety of French locales, ranging from farms to strip clubs, from arcades to factories, and everything in between. It was great to see the movie shake up the setting so much, and it also helped that most of the movie was backed by an upbeat soundtrack in keeping with the light tone of an action comedy. In between all of these scenes, there's a romance between Ousmane and Alice, a fellow police officer, but if I'm being honest, it's quite generic. They never engage in any sort of proper romantic build-up, and her character arc can be seen coming a mile away. With all of this taken into consideration, as average as it turned out to be, I am glad I was able to enjoy it without needing to see the first movie it follows up from. I normally don't review sequels without having seen their predecessors first, but in this case I think it's nice that it's more standalone in nature and doesn't necessarily require seeing the original. Overall, The Takedown is a decent if forgettable action flick that won't blow anyone's minds, but as far as pure entertainment goes, it does get the job done. If you're looking for an action comedy to have a good time with and you don't mind dealing with lots of weird comedy bits, you might enjoy checking this one out. I'm curious to see how the first movie compares to the second, but this one is okay for the most part. It has its issues with problematic comedy and the story doesn't always make sense, but I still had fun watching it, and for this kind of movie, that's what ultimately matters. What did you think about this movie? Did you like the relationship the lead characters had, or were you also a bit bothered with how the comedy was presented? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of The Takedown. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the American animated family film, Marmaduke. Bye bye!